The Graphic Histories Podcast.
I got bit by a radioactive bug. I tried an experimental drug. Went up for a stroll on a gamma testing range. I found an enchanted hurricane. I made a serum that made me small. I modified the serum so it would make me tall. Radioactive isotope in my eyes. Dying alien helped me accessorize. I gained the proportion and strength of a spider. Now I'm invincible and I can fly. I lost my sight, my other senses were heightened. I'm gonna put on my pajamas and go fight crime.
Hey there, and welcome to the Graphic Histories Podcast. My name is Andre Mayette, your podcast host. Big thanks to Uka the Mock for our theme song, Superpowers. And big thanks to you for tuning in once again. I hope you had a wonderful Halloween. I hope the ghouls and the goblins were plentiful. You had some candy, you watched some horror movies, and you had a really good time. Now that Halloween is over, the stores can start putting up all of the Christmas stuff. I do like Christmas. But, I kind of think it should be confined to December. But, that's capitalism for you, I guess. Today on the show, we have Steve Bynoe, who is a really cool guy, really great comic artist and writer, who's created some really cool projects, working currently on one called Atrium, which is getting collected and put out on Kickstarter. We talk about that during the show. From Toronto, and a teacher. So, people that... Teaching was always something that I had considered when looking into what I was going to do after high school. It was kind of a toss-up between teacher and graphic designer, and I ended up going with graphic designer, but teacher is one of those paths not taken. So I always enjoy talking to people that teach, people that are out there doing the thing. And it's a great little chat and a great conversation. Steve's a really down-to-earth kind of guy, and I love those sort of people. Great chats, right? They're just open. They make for great conversations. And I've had a good run. I've had some really cool people on the show. I mean, everybody that's been on the show has been great. I really have no complaints about any of the guests on the show. But lately, it feels like the conversation has been really opening up and getting into some fun places. So maybe that's just experience. As you do enough of these, it sort of gives you, hones your technique in having these conversations and getting into some interesting topics and conversations. And it could just be, life or anything like that. That always helps too. So, good chat with Steve. So, the show's plugging along. We're doing great things over here. If you like what we're doing here at Graphic Histories Podcast, be sure to like and subscribe. Check out the other United Federation of podcasts, and check out what me and Davin are doing over on X-Rated, the X-Men animated review show. We're currently going through X-Men Evolution, which is a series never watched as a kid at all. So it's kind of interesting to kind of get the deep dive through it as we plug along on our X-Men journey, me and Davin. So check that out too. But what you should really check out is this conversation that I have right now with Steve Bynoe. Enjoy.
How are you?
Good, Steve. How are you?
Not too bad, thanks.
Hey. Oh man, I love when I have people on the show and I get to look at their shelves.
I'll get out of the way.
No, it's great. It's the kind of cool books they got there.
I got my Unwrapped. I got some manga, an old Batman encyclopedia.
Oh, that's fun. I love those old books. That's awesome. Nice.
I'm not sure who got this for me. It might have been it was my godfather from back in 1980. Oh my God.
The ancient time.
I'm purely dating myself. Some old Tintin and then my art books.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. Your shelf's pretty impressive too. You got like the Gremlins.
Yeah, this is just my office. I actually have a library in my house that it was like a sewing room for the lady that owned the house before we bought it.
Right.
My dad's a carpenter, and I got him to come in, and we made it wall to wall all books. So there are some in there. Those are all like kind of art books, but mostly it's a bunch of ephemera of my nerdy interests. A lot of horror stuff. Very cool.
Hey, we're all there.
That's right. I know it's funny because I think it's a product of my age, in that you sort of still sort of apologize for being nerdy, even though it's not. It's not like a socially not cool thing anymore, right? Like it's the things that were nerdy that we would have used to apologize for are now multi-billion-dollar franchises. So it's like You know,
It's so true. It's so true. Like I remember back in the day, it would be like, "Oh, you read comic books," and it wasn't bad. It was just like, "Oh, you read comic books,"
Mhm.
and then now it's like it doesn't matter whether you're a hot girl, a hot guy, you know who Naruto is, you
Yeah.
know, or the MCU.
Mhm.
Where back in the days, it was like, the cool people were going to rock concerts and
Yeah, I know, yeah.
smoking it back and all that stuff at school.
I once heard it described that way, that like if it used to be like way like back in the day, even in my youth, but
Uh-huh.
I was born in 85, so like,
Okay.
but eventually you get to like you see someone wearing a Superman t-shirt and that was enough to know, oh, there's a nerd. Like that guy's into Superman.
Yeah.
Now you got to look for the really obscure ones. It's like, well, this was like a bar that the villains went into in one issue of Spider-Man. It's like the logo. You're like, oh, well, that guy definitely really is into comics because, he knows enough to get that particular shirt.
Yeah, for sure. Or knows like would wear like Star Labs. It's
Yeah.
not Superman, you're wearing Star Labs.
Yeah. Even that, like, because the Flash TV show isn't like that
Exactly.
unobscure anymore. So you kind of got to really pick your obscurity to know how deep into the nerddom they are.
How times have changed.
You're calling in from Toronto, you said?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. The reason why I'm not looking at you is because I'm trying to remember the name of the store I visited in Halifax. There was a
Oh,
store that I visited,
Strange Adventures?
the Monster Comic Lounge.
Yep. Yep. That's on the Godgen Street.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a big Miles Davis
Hmm.
uh, painting on one of the buildings. It's fantastic.
Yeah, right before there. That's a beautiful. I never realized it was a Miles Davis painting.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean the one around the? Oh, yes, yes. Sorry, I'm thinking of. There's like an art one that's on one building, and then there's like a mural. Yeah, it's the
Yeah.
mural one. Yes, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. They got some cool. They have a big one now for an actor that was on the Trailer Park Boys that passed away that played
Oh, right.
Leahy on the Trailer Park Boys. They have his mural up on a big wall somewhere there as well in Halifax, which is cool.
The art is fantastic. It wouldn't have struck me that that kind of art would have been on the buildings
Mm.
in Halifax,
Yeah,
right?
it's really
Kind of a
cool.
Montreal thing almost. Like
Uh,
when you think of like art
yeah,
but it's great. Halifax,
yeah.
oh man,
Yeah, it's a cool town. I'm in Truro, which is about an hour from there, but I do like I just got a gig I do some acting and I got a gig on a commercial
nice.
that's filming in Halifax on Friday, so I'll be hanging out there probably afterwards. And I usually go and make a day of it, go to the comic stores, go to the bookstores, the record store, and go see some movies. So probably be doing that. Were you raised in Toronto? Is that where you're from?
Yeah, I'm born and bred in Toronto.
Nice.
Buddy who's in Halifax, I went to high school with him.
Hmm.
He moved out with his wife. Oh my God, I guess like maybe in the late 90s.
Really?
Yeah, so I've been out. I think I've been out there 3 times. Totally love it out east. Would
Mm.
love to see more of it. Just haven't had the chance to yet. I gotta, go hit all the conventions that are out there.
Yeah, straight
I do miss doing.
HowCon's coming up, which is a big one.
Yeah, Halcon's huge.
Yeah.
Halcon is huge.
And
Yeah.
there's some good ones for I always promote one in Moncton called East Coast Comic Expo because that one is really just comic centric. So
Let let me make a note of that.
sure, East Coast Comic Expo. It's in Moncton, New Brunswick. So it's out here just on the New Brunswick side. It's about a couple hours from maybe 2.5 hours from Halifax when you're going into New Brunswick,
Right.
but about an hour and a half from where I live in Truro. But it's a beautiful spot, and it's really focused on comics specifically, which is nice because a lot of
Right.
them are like sci-fi conventions that just have a little comic area.
Hmm.
This
Hmm.
one's very comic centric. Nick Bradshaw does art for Marvel. He is one of
Right.
the people that kind of got it going, so he's usually
Oh,
there. And
I
there are
didn't
actually,
realize he was out from out east.
yeah, actually, there's quite a few people that either started from out here or moved out here because like during COVID, it just a lot of folks like decided they could do whatever they do wherever, and it's
Right.
cheaper to live out here. So like Ed Brisson, who writes for Marvel, he lives out here now. He was one of my first guests in the show actually,
Wow, that's
and
awesome.
yeah, Jed McKay is in
Okay.
PEI. Steve McNiven is in Halifax. There's quite a few guys around that like have decent names.
Canadians unite. There's a lot of talent above the 49th
Hmm.
parallel, and it kind of is like undercover,
Hmm.
but
Yeah.
coast to coast, we'd field a pretty good team.
Agree. I agree. I actually, it's funny because this week it just sort of aligned that I was talking to three people in one week, which doesn't always work out that way when I'm doing these conversations. But
Right.
but yesterday I spoke with Johnny Christmas, who like worked with Margaret Atwood and all this stuff. And I know he's from America originally, but he's Canadian citizen now. And you just think about the level of skill and how many I've talked to in the last little week. They're just Canadians. They're just killing it, knocking it out of the park.
Oh yeah, and then going to like Dale Keown, John
Mm.
Byrne, Todd
Oh
McFarlane,
yeah, go back to the
this
classics. Yeah,
list goes on.
yeah.
And then obviously new creators like he's not new, but Ken Lashley's Canadian,
Love
and
Ken. Yeah, he's awesome.
so there's a lot of us who are, we're making our way.
That's right. That's right. Well, where did you start with comics?
Oh my gosh. I started, it was probably my cousins that got me into it
Yeah.
way back. And so I would just read their collection, and I making my own, taking those trips out to like the variety stores.
Hmm.
And then after that, I actually ran into Ken Lashley probably around second year university, and
Really?
he was starting his studio called Draxall Jump.
Hmm.
I think my mom was a principal and his mom was a principal here in Toronto,
Oh, cool.
the school system. And so they were the matchmakers. And he came over to my house. We chatted. And then I was part of his studio. He invited me to join. And since then, I've just carried on. The studio didn't survive, unfortunately, but a lot of the guys that were part of it, we're still friends to this day, including some of the people that I'm working on Atrium with.
Oh, that's awesome. Was
Yeah.
I assume your parents were cool with you going into a career in art, if they were pushing you towards cool might be too deep of a word, but
Oh
uh
no, absolutely not. My
no?
parents are Bajan, so they're from Barbados,
Oh, really?
right? So they're like kind of old school, and they knew I love comics. My dad was more like accepting of me loving comics, even though they both, were fans of Captain Marvel. I think my mom liked Mary Marvel back in the day, which
Really?
to me was kind of shocking, especially growing up in the West Indies. And my dad, he never really, he was more like a Western, like he liked Westerns and
Hmm.
war movies and stuff like that. Um, and so when I said I wanted to get into comics, they're like, yeah, right.
Yeah.
And I think my dad said there's no starving teachers.
That sounds like a dad line. That's very
It's a
much a dad.
complete line.
Yeah.
He was
Yeah.
hilarious. And so I went into teaching. I followed my mom into teaching,
Hmm.
and I don't regret it. It was one of those things where I all through school when I was a kid, I would like draw in my notebooks. I would like make my own comics after school, that kind of stuff, and it kind of continued into high school. And then working in the studio with Ken, it was just like eye opening. It was kind of like going to university
Hmm.
for comics. It was before the Cuber School was even a thing. So even though we were part of a business and we were working on like Star Wars, and we were working for Hasbro doing Star
Hmm.
Wars packaging and GI Joe and Transformers, and also some comic work for Image. I think we worked on Rising Stars and Ghost. I think Christian Zaner, who was part of the crew,
Oh,
worked on
cool.
Ghost.
Ghost. That's
Yeah,
that's very much an iconic memory of like that era of night. A lot of that is from like Wizard magazine. I remember reading those. So
yeah,
like
exactly.
the ads for Ghost and like Evil Ernie and
Yes,
Lady Death and all that. Was it Lady
yeah,
Death?
all
Yeah, and
that
all
kind of
those.
stuff.
Yeah,
You're right,
yeah.
totally. And so that kind of fueled me. And then after the studio broke down, it was like I gotta do this. I gotta do this. And
Mhm.
so, you know, kind of connected with a guy who I'm currently partners with, not only with Atrium but at Comix Asylum, Vaughn Joseph. We decided, let's do a magazine. Let's kind of figure this out. And we decided this is before like Hollywood Reporter,
Mhm.
Bloomberg were covering comic books, uh,
Yeah,
Deadline, and all that kind of stuff. It was like,
yeah.
where are you going to get comic book news? If it wasn't Wizard, right, then you weren't going to get anything. And like, this is, I guess, even before Reddit and all that kind of
Mhm.
stuff. Like those chat rooms existed. So we decided to do a digital magazine, and we founded Comix Asylum in 2014. And we were getting news flashes and news blasts from Marvel and Paramount, and it was really good because we for the digital magazine we needed photos, right? And where would you get photos other than the press sites? So I think it was, can't remember his name, but it was one of the head dudes at Paramount who was like, yeah, you know what? Here's the access to the photos that you're requesting, and then call this person at Marvel and tell them I spoke to you, and then we'll go from there. And then that's how we got on the press list. This is like 2014.
Wow.
Yeah, so we've been doing Comix Asylum ever since. And then around 2018, we're like, okay, we have this idea that's been percolating. Why don't we publish it through us, through Comix Asylum? Because we went the route of going to like all the companies, Mad Cave, Image, and they didn't accept our pitch. So we said, let's just do it ourselves.
Wow. That's awesome. That's the best DIY spirit when it comes to comics. And like, it's such an age now that you can do that, which is so cool. Like, I was having this conversation with someone earlier about how, the era of like self-publishing, the era of self doing anything, movies, you do on your phone, you get rudimentary equipment that cover a lot of stuff. And also like with publishing, like even just people writing books, like you just go to Amazon and just upload your PDF and they'll just publish it on demand.
It's crazy. It's like the old $6 million man theme. We have the technology.
Yeah, we can rebuild him.
Yeah, so we can build your career kind of thing.
Yeah,
you're right, because there was a lot of like how do you make the sausage for a lot of stuff, right?
Yeah.
I think musicians had it ahead of the curve, maybe more so than comic book people and people who were in film, because like it's just a smaller amount of people that you need to get like a mixtape. Right. So
yeah,
you find someone to like put your track down. You can then bring your mixtape to somebody, and then you can then get discovered that way. Comics, it's a little bit easier than like a film, but still more people than perhaps getting a mixtape together, because you got to get someone in your area who A, likes the stuff, and then B, is skilled enough to want to draw it, write it, and then if you were going to color it and all that kind of stuff. And then how would you distribute it?
Yeah.
Because there were no channels. Like you can't go to like, back in the day, it would have been a variety store, but even an LCS now, and say, hey, would you take our book? But even then, it's like only people in your town would be able to do. So with the internet and being able to have basically digital distribution at your fingertips, at the end of your keyboard, at the end of your phone, even, it's so much easier to get your stuff out.
Yeah. And it's wild too what's available. Like I've been getting a lot of targeted ads for like, read every Vampirella comic for like $5. We'll send you like, it's like for like 40 years of Vampirella comics, get them for $4.99. You're like, well, this is amazing. Like
Totally.
It's
Absolutely.
wild. Well, working in the studio system is always interesting to me. I spoke with Ramon Perez about, because he has the Raid studio in Toronto there. And like the idea of that, like I really kind of romanticize that sort of world. It reminds me of like the old Kirby-esque when they're all working in like, rolled up sleeves with the little things on them and the green visor working on comics. But the idea that like you have like a real community that's all working together in this place to get these projects done together. I think the first time in comics I noticed that was when like the coloring for a book was labeled to a studio instead of like a person. I think it was like, it was like Iron Man or something had like Guru FX or Guru EFX or something was like listed as the colorists. And I was like, well, that's interesting. Like it's like a studio's getting it instead of individual people.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because like, I guess back in the day you still had that, but you might have been part of the bullpen, or worked out of like Neil Adams's office. And so it might not necessarily gone down as a Neil Adams type thing or whatever, but I think Mike Diodato, I think he had kind of like a Diodato studio. So like when it wasn't something where he was working on fully, I maybe, don't take this as gospel.
Yeah.
But when he was working on something where it would have been like the collection of artists that were in his studio, it would go down as a Diodato Studios thing.
And working on like stuff for Hasbro, and that must have been interesting. And like, because I'm a graphic designer, that's my day-to-day job. So, that world is very familiar to me. And I've spoken with a few folks on the show who are in that world as well, the transition to comics or did whatever. But like there's a guy that I had on Dorian, Guy Dorian Sr., I think it was, that worked on.
Dorian Sr., I know him quite well.
Oh, yeah.
Stream a couple weeks ago. He drew ROM back in the day.
Yeah, and he worked on like a lot of the WWE toys. It's like these Flex ones from way back in the day. So we had a conversation about that as well. Yeah.
It's amazing though, right? Because like you think of, I guess it's the same way in anything. So like you look at politics, you look at like movie stars, and you only see like the figurehead,
Mm,
and then you don't realize that below them or behind the camera or off camera, there's like tens and scores of people that are needed to bring something to fruition, right? But we only hear about like the names at the top of the pyramid.
mhm. Yeah. Well, that's very interesting. Cool. And doing the comic sort of journalism, how was that to approach? Like, it's got to be hard. Like, I guess being someone that's grown up with like Wizard and those sort of magazines, and some of those sites I used to kind of follow when they were around like Bleeding Cool and stuff when I was young. But like getting to jump into that realm must be very interesting to try to keep um like keep a bipartisan look at it, I guess, to don't really like pick a side. And because like as comic fan and a nerd yourself, I'm sure you're passionate about things, so it's got to be kind of hard to differentiate that passion, or at least set it aside to try to objectively report on some of these stories as they came out.
Oh, definitely. And it's one of those things too. I guess like I was an English mage back in
Okay.
university.
Nice.
So I had a little bit of that kind of being able to look at something and kind of critique it. Um, but it's one thing to like read a dusty Shakespeare.
Mhm.
Not to throw shade on Shakespeare because I love stuff like Macbeth and whatnot. I love Shakespeare, but
Mhm.
like when it's something that you are, and you can see it even today because there's a lot of like rage on social media over like whether Star Wars or Spider-Man or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's hard to be objective sometimes when you love something and then you're watching the movie and you're like, oh, really? That's how they did it?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. But it was fun though, because what it allowed me to do is to like not only talk to people such as yourself,
Mhm.
but also talk to people much like you're doing who are in the inside, who are actually making the sausage, right?
Mhm.
And you just realize like the layers. So like we were reviewing The Walking Dead and Fear the Walking Dead for a while. So we were getting screeners from AMC.
No,
And then
cool.
we would get to do like the press junkets where when the new season's coming out, we get to do a roundtable. It was a digital roundtable, but it was still one of those things where you get to talk to the actors.
Yeah.
And then I was after a while started asking them questions, which would then kind of help me with my storytelling,
Mm.
right? So it's kind of like going back to the studio days where it's like, okay, I'm going to use these not only to help, increase the brand of what I was doing as an entertainment journalist. It's kind of weird saying that, but I guess that's what it was.
Yeah.
I was just covering stuff I loved,
Yeah.
but also being able to learn a little bit about something that was so foreign because I
Yeah.
didn't go to like a school where I learned about TV or script writing or even like how to draw comics. Like my schooling was just going to the variety store every week and picking up the books I liked.
Mm. Well, that's interesting because yeah, you're right. It's like in doing this sort of thing and getting to know those sort of people. I always say it's really cool when you realize some of the people you sort of look up to, or people that appreciate their work, or hold them in some kind of high regard. You meet them and they're like actually cool people. So
Yes.
doing a journalism in that way, um, I think would be really rewarding when that happens. I mean, obviously the opposite is possible when they're not, but the idea that like you really get to just report on the things you love would be so interesting. 'Cause I'm sure most journalists, covering, this election or whatever's going on in the States, are probably bored out of their tree, or not, or disinterested in, or maybe just super interested in politics and that's it, and or the human interest stories or whatever it is they're doing. But with the comic reporting, I imagine there's like interest in pretty much everything that you would be reporting on. So
Yeah, there is that. It's kind of interesting though, because I think it's kind of weird, like mentioning like politics and the
Mhm.
people who are covering it.
Mm.
It almost seems like that's a form of entertainment. So you know how
Oh
people,
yeah, yeah, kind of, yeah,
right? People watch Stephen A. Smith to see how he's going to like rail on the Cowboys
yeah,
every
yeah,
time, and that's kind of like a appointment viewing.
yeah.
I think for every whether it's financial or sports or politics or what we are in, where you're looking at geek culture, there's some who are basically kind of superseding the actual product because you're looking for the reaction of how can we slag on this new movie. Like I'll put it out there. Like I am probably one of the few people that like Marvels or the Marvels, whatever that movie
I
was.
loved it. I thought it was great too. Put me in
And
that camp.
yeah, so all right, so we're part of the same tribe there. And like I was trying to figure out where all this vitriol was coming from. And yeah, okay, fine, they're not the A-list characters, but as a movie, it was entertaining.
Yeah.
Right. The actors were in it. Obviously, nothing in a script is going to be on point because these things are made by committee a lot of times.
Yes. Yeah.
But for the most part, that movie was more entertaining than a lot of the stuff the MCU had been putting out up until that point, and even post that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's almost like people wanted to get eyeballs to slag that film, as opposed, are you really deconstructing it for what it is, or is it just like, is it an agenda that you're trying to push when you're critiquing these things?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is like, I've talked about this a lot in the show, so I don't need to go into too much, but there's a couple ways I look at it. One is, I think a lot of it is like Star Wars is one to use an example. They did like the Force Awakens. People are like, well, this is too similar to old Star Wars, we don't like it. And then they're like, well, here's something wildly different. Like, well, this is too different, we don't like this. And then like, well, here's something trying to cram the two into some weird mismatched thing to make everyone happy. And like, we hate this, it's a disjointed mess. So, you're never going to make them happy, because I think most people, as you mentioned like way earlier, you say this is the way they're going with this, because in your head everyone kind of builds up the perfect way would be to end this, or the perfect way would be to approach this. It'd be so great if like Kylo Ren turned out to be the Emperor's nephew or something, and like that in their head they've built this would clean up all this continuity, this would make everything perfect. And when they get there, it's not the perfect movie that they built in their head. So they're immediately disappointed, because they have all of this expectation for this thing that no one knows about except your own brain, because you built it up already.
It's what's weird, that I've never thought of it that way, but I think you've nailed it. It's kind of like almost like dating.
Yeah.
You've built up this first date, like who this person's going to be, and then you meet them and you realize, oh, they've got weird toes, or they habit, and it's like they're not what you thought. Because the one thing that I must admit that as an adult has hit me the most is most people are disappointed that the things that they want from other people aren't up to their expectations.
Yeah. Expectations is like the biggest problem. If you boil it down to that, to most things. And the other thing I think when it comes to the Marvels is like this weird false equivalency where people are like, well, Ricky Gervais did the stand-up special one time he had this bit that always kind of stuck with me, which was where he talked about how like the world now, or at least the internet, was like, if you walk by a board, like a pegboard in a restaurant, it has all these things going on in the community, and one of them says guitar lessons with a number on it, and you look at it and you go, guitar lessons? Well, I don't want any fucking guitar lessons. And you rip off the number, you fume about it, you go home, you pick up your phone, you call the guy, you say, are you the guy for guitar lessons? And the guy says, yeah. And he says, well, I don't want any fucking guitar lessons. And hang up the phone. It's like, it's not for you, just leave it there and move on. Now, like, people just can't do that. And like, when they see something like the Marvels, and if they're not into the character, they're not into that world, then they think that this exists instead of something else they would like to see. So they're like, instead of getting, I don't know, the Vision movie I want now, or whatever, whatever thing they want that they're not getting, the Captain America returning all of the time stones or whatever. Like, because of that, they think, well, this exists instead of this thing I really want. So fuck this thing. It shouldn't exist. But in the end, it's like the female Ghostbusters movie or whatever. It's like, it's not for you.
I like
Move
that.
on. I thought it was fine. I wouldn't say it's a cinematic masterpiece.
No,
but it's fine. I would say it's,
but it's fine.
Well, like any major franchise, it's mostly trying to dip into nostalgia at this point, and also like, add something new to the game. But little girls might watch that, and it might be their Ghostbusters that they love, and get them to, so just let it be, let it be.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, because like, think about it. If you go into a comic book store, you're not coming out there with every book.
No.
And there were times, like, even when you went to a spinner rack in a variety store, you went for your books. So you went for, like, say, like, I collected Hulk, Spider-Man, Teen Titans, and I think I bought the odd Nova, right?
Nice.
Back in the day. So anything Spectacular Spider-Man, Web of Spider-Man, that kind of stuff. I would dip into Cap if a writer or an artist was drawing it that month, or if someone was guest starring, or if the cover looked great, right? Or when Alpha Flight showed up, I'm like, okay, I'm buying this book. But I didn't buy any Howard the Duck. I never bought like Ghost Rider. And why? Because it just didn't appeal to me. But did that then mean no Ghost Rider comics should exist? No. And film is completely different because it's such a huge ordeal.
Yeah.
And it costs so much money that they have to pick and choose which projects they're going to greenlight. Like you just can't put out 15 movies a year. Like even what we were getting from like 2008 to whenever the MCU ended with Phase 4 or whatever the Infinity War movies were, absolutely spoiled. Like you can nitpick about how certain characters were portrayed, you can nitpick about how certain things happen, but overall to get that the way that it was done, lucky. And unfortunately, I think they were too good because, as you say, going back to expectations, that's ruined everybody now. It's like back to dating. My first high school crush was whatever. And no person has ever, matched that. And so you're always comparing this person not to now, but to an idealized memory of somebody and like a newness, right? Like that first high of being in love and all that. That stuff fades after a while, right? Like you could be 50 and fall in love again, but you won't have butterflies, you'll have moths.
Yeah. Well, there's even like scientific evidence. It's like a lot of it is like when you're a kid, all your brain levels, like your cortisol and all that is going so big. It's everything so big that all your experience is so high. It evens out when you get a little older. So you remember things being so massive as a kid because in a way they kind of were to you. But when you get older, it's like not anymore. Like you still have that there, like you're still excited, you're still whatever, but it's not like, like there's a time where I didn't sleep Christmas night. I was so excited for Christmas Day. I would like literally my mom would have to yell at me, turn my light off because I'd just be reading in my room because I couldn't sleep because I was too excited about Christmas morning. So, now I will happily go to bed at whatever time and wake up. I still love Christmas. I still have that excitement, but I can sleep, like it's not driving me insane with the anticipation of the excitement.
For sure. And like you think of like who was your favorite, I don't know, sports figure when you were 15? And what were your favorite shows when you were 15? And you look back on them fondly, and then you watch them later on, and you're like, man, that individual was really slow. Or the average person, let's just use hockey. The third liner nowadays would have been a first line all-star in the 70s.
Yeah.
Because of the differences in nutrition, the changes in equipment. People who could skate a certain way were put in certain positions, and now all defensemen can skate well.
Yeah.
Right. And so, you look at old cartoons, you're like, man, okay, that didn't hit the way that I remember it. You might like the theme song, you might like the intro, but then you go through an actual episode, and you're like, not as great.
Exactly. Yeah. And also like, because it's new to you when you see it, but then you go on and you see the same story done in a different way 100 more times. It doesn't mean as much going back to it. It's like when someone says you should watch The Exorcist, it's the scariest movie of all time. You go back and watch it if you've already watched horror movies for years and been like, well, I get, but you don't realize you weren't there when this came out because it was new. Nobody's seen it before. Now we've seen 100 versions of it, so it's different.
It's a great point. I actually, and my friends kind of chuckled at me. I said, there was maybe about a month ago, I was like, I'm gonna actually watch The Godfather because
I haven't yet, so yeah. I know. Yeah.
So there you go. Because to me, Godfather was like Blade Runner.
Yeah.
Like, you turn it on, Blade Runner was always on like New Year's Eve for some reason.
Oh yeah, because they expect you to sit around and watch all of them for 9 hours.
Exactly, and it's like you catch 10 minutes of it here, and you catch 10 minutes of it here, and like, okay, I'm going to sit down and watch it. But you basically know it because it's part of the zeitgeist, right?
Yeah.
So I actually sat down and watched the first one. I go, oh, okay. I'll watch the second one. So I decided to do all three in one day.
Nice.
And I have to admit, okay, it's good, but it wasn't as like mind blowing as people say. But when you think of all the stuff that you've watched since, whether it's Sopranos or even Star Wars or something, and everything kind of relates to family, right? And the interpersonal kind of relationships that The Godfather set up, then you go, now you know why. Like, I see why it's amazing. It's kind of like watching Hitchcock. You watch Hitchcock now and you're like, I get it, but I don't get it. Go watch those early, Sean Connerys, and you're like, okay, I get it, but does it match, maybe what Daniel Craig's doing, or Tom Cruise, who's kind of perfected the whole James Bond thing better than the James Bond people.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it's interesting because like I watch a lot of movies and I've been trying to watch a lot of horror movies for Halloween. Just for October. I'm a big Halloween nerd. So a friend of mine who has another podcast that does movie reviews. They're doing they usually have a guest and then every three of them pick a movie. So I've been on it before. They usually have a theme. So the one they have coming up is zombies. So I picked this movie called Fido, which I really loved, which I think was filmed in Ottawa, or Toronto. But the other guy that always picks old movies picked like one of the originals. I Walked with a Zombie, like
Okay.
from it's from the RKO Studios. It's like black and white, very old school. Val Lewton did it. It's very old, and I'm watching it, and it's like an hour and 10 minutes long, which is beautiful for old movies. They're short. But there's some stuff in there that is generally creepy and kind of, you know what I mean? Like there's stuff to enjoy from it. You can see where future zombie movies, or at least future things like horror winds, have gone about getting those tropes and doing that sort of thing. So there's still cream in there. Like I know what you're saying. Same with Blade Runner. I felt like to me, like I watched a new Blade Runner movie and I was like, I like this one infinitely better than I like the other one, and I love the other one, but this one moved at such a better pace. But that one set up a world. Like it just built
Hmm.
this dirty future world where and did something unique for what it was at the time. But you see a thousand things that are doing it again. It's.
And it's also easier to build, right, on
Mm,
something that exists.
yeah.
So you can kind of like once you have it in front of you, you can kind of go, okay, that we can tweak that, right? And
Mm.
someone like Denis Villeneuve, who's like amazing.
Oh yeah, agreed.
I guess he's doing it again with Dune because like the
Yes.
first Dune came out, and because of the age I was like, I'm not watching that, man. I'm not watching the Dune from like the 1980s because like I was a Star Wars kid.
Mhm.
So you're coming from like stormtroopers and Darth Vader, choking people from across starships, and then you've got Sting, who I love as an artist.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
wasn't, I
I
wasn't,
forgot he was in that. Yeah, yeah.
I'm not watching it with like the technology that they had, and then the pacing of the story. But like Dune now, all in. Like
Yeah,
I love the first two movies, and it's just like because they have the technology for it,
yeah,
and you look at the old one and say, okay, we've done this. How do we make it better?
yeah, yeah. Like nothing's built in a vacuum, right? Like in our world, it's almost like the goalpost moves too, because once you make one movie, then the public sees that movie, and then it's easier to, like the first few vampire movies are probably very weird, and but once society as general understand that like I know what they are, like Nosferatu and all those ones, like
Mm.
once they get to the point where they're like, well, we now accept vampires and know what they're all about and their stuff, it's a little easier to play with the trope, uh do spoofs or build on it or even circumvent expectations, because now the expectations are there, so you can have fun with that too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like one of those things where you do have the storytelling aspects because just having a guy walking around and turning into a bat,
Mhm.
that doesn't necessarily translate nowadays. But back in the day, that would have been like, oh my gosh.
Yeah,
But people changing a whole bunch of stuff
yeah.
now in a whole bunch of different genres. So like you gotta move the goalposts, as you said,
Mhm.
to make it interesting. And you know, when you then also kind of are in a society where Saw exists,
Mhm.
as well as Star Wars, like the canteen scene,
Mhm.
someone with pointy teeth, like
Mhm.
whatever,
Yeah,
you,
yeah,
you, you got to shift it.
yeah. I like the what you said there about how certain things kind of the technology in the world is right and ready to accept it. Like I thought about that. I was talking with someone about the Lord of the Rings, and I was saying,
Mm,
like, imagine if they'd made that live action in the '70s. Like, what would have looked like? It would have looked kind of like Conan the Barbarian,
yeah.
like, but like it just would have been really interesting and wild. Or if they made the Avengers movies in the '90s, like, what would that have looked like? It would have been insane. you know.
Just go look at those early Marvel movies, and you have
Oh, fair enough. Yeah, that's
like that
true.
early Captain America '90s version, like the suit
Yeah.
worked, but it was like, But then you go back to the '70s version with Reb Brown, and he's wearing a motorcycle helmet, and
Yeah.
you're like, no,
Yeah.
no,
I remember being so excited as a kid to rent that Captain America movie. Because like when I was young, and I'm sure you understand this, there's a vacuum or a desert of superhero content. You had like the Tim Burton Batman movies and the old Superman movies, and little scattered, like the made-for-TV Doctor Strange movie, you could find it, or the Roger Corman Fantastic Four movie never got put out. X-Men, Blade sort of opened the door, and then X-Men and then Spider-Man, and then we were off to the races a little bit. But at that time, you had like nothing. Like it was, you just grasped. And I remember renting that and being so excited to watch it. And then, like, even as a kid who was infinitely happy to just watch something comics, I was still disappointed by it.
Right.
Like the Red Skull was Italian. I remember I was like, why? What?
Skull.
Yeah.
It was more like Jigsaw from Punisher, if anything.
Yeah,
Right.
because his face is sort of melted off. It wasn't really like a
Yeah.
skull.
Yeah,
But
it's kind of weird. And you know what's interesting though? You did kind of grow up in a superhero desert because
mm,
you said you're born mid 80s, right?
yeah,
So by the time you were like 6 or 7, it would have been you would have had Tim Burton's Batman, and then I guess you're going to the Schumacher era, and then you would have had like a really bad Punisher movie, and
which I
then
wouldn't have seen.
which you would have seen, right?
Yeah,
'Cause, and then that Captain America movie, which is something else.
yeah.
But
It
like
was
what
mostly cartoons.
it
That's
was
what
more
you had. Yeah,
cartoons. Like the cartoons were killing it. But like
yeah.
as a kid for live action, looking back on it, it wasn't great, but at least you had stuff.
Mm,
You had the Hulk series.
yeah, right.
Superman the movie had come out. Superman 2 had been out. You still had the Adam West reruns for Batman.
Mm.
We had stuff like the $6 Million Man. Wonder Woman was on TV. Did I mention the Hulk? Like you had the Incredible
Yeah.
Hulk first episode of the Incredible Hulk.
I
Still,
always forget about that show. That
yeah,
was
it still works as a great horror movie.
Mhm.
That horror angle that the Hulk can go into.
Yeah.
And so we had a lot in the 70s and then early 80s, and then it kind of died out because everything went to film and then Star Wars upping the game. Then you had to have like the technology to have the effects work.
Mhm.
And if you look at like the old Spider-Man stuff from like I guess late 70s, and you compare it to like even what's going on now, or even that first Spider-Man movie, it's like night and day.
Mhm.
Like how do you have him crawl? How do you have him swing? All that kind of stuff. And so we still had it, but then we moved out of it. And then that's when like Japanese animation, like anime, came in. So we had that in our teams to like Robotech and Gotcha Man and all that kind of stuff. But you were on a bit of a dry spell when it came to like straight superheroes, right?
Yeah. And then like I even grew up in like a fairly rural area, so I didn't even have like cable. So I just had like with CBC and CTV or whatever. So I just got whatever that was.
Kid of the 70s, cable, especially West Indian parents, no way.
Yeah.
I used to have to hang onto the antenna. Spider-Man and his amazing friends.
Yeah. Yeah, that's funny. I remember I used to stay up I used to get up at like 5 in the morning or something just because I had like a rabbit ears on my TV that could get like certain channels that we didn't get normally, and I could watch like the Batman animated series or the Superman animated series. I used to get the Batman one on TV normally, but they had like the Superman one was on there too, which I didn't get on CBC or something, and then like Mighty Mouse and some of these other things that I never had. So
yeah, I love Mighty Mouse.
Yeah, it was classic stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool. So now that you mentioned you're getting into the realm of doing your own publishing, like what was the idea, the concept, and going through shopping it to the different studios and getting that rejection? What was that like?
It was kind of interesting because when you create these things in like a bit of a vacuum, you think, okay, this'll work. I think they'll take it. And then being a comic book connoisseur, I would argue, collecting my entire life and reading a lot of stuff and then covering it, and we get preview pages from a lot of companies, and you kind of know what a certain level of proficiency is needed to create a book. So we're like, even though we had some setbacks with Atrium in terms of like getting it out at a certain point and then finding the right artist, we were like, our final product that we were ready to pitch with Lucas and Lucas Falapi, who's our artist out of Brazil, and Nikos Koutsis and Mike Torres, who actually color Savage Dragon for Image.
Cool.
We're like, okay, if anything, they're gonna think that the writing is the issue, because like co-scribe Peter Van Horn and myself, we co-wrote it and we're all co-creators, and we're like, okay, if there's one thing that they can point to, it'll probably be the writing, because that's kind of like art subjective, but writing is way harder to kind of like parse.
Yeah.
So we're like, let's go. We looked at the book, we looked at the pages, we felt they matched and they made sense and would look good next to anything else that's in the marketplace. And I think one of the key things is that the book looks great. It's just we were relatively unknown.
Hmm.
And so being kind of told no, it's kind of like, okay, well, this happens to the best of them. Like you hear about Todd McFarlane, not saying we're on that level, or Jim Lee, but like they got rejected from Marvel too. So someone who was making those decisions wasn't ready for them at that point.
Well, do they give you an explanation? Would they say like, are the writings up to snuff or we, or they just say no?
Like certain companies they'll say we're not. You won't get a response,
Mhm.
right? And then other companies might say thank you for your submission, but we are not taking anything like this at this time.
Mm.
And then we got some really interesting feedback from Image where it was like the art wasn't up to like their standards,
Oh, okay.
right?
That'll be way more helpful than just blanketly saying no and then letting you try to figure out what possible reasons could be.
Absolutely. And then it's like, and this goes for even what I do. That's one person's opinion,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
And, history is littered with a lot of people going, that idea is terrible. I'm not taking it. And then someone goes, well, I'll take it. And then it works, right? Like, it happens with stocks, it happens with music, it happens with movies. So, Lucas's art wasn't something that the people at Image were looking for. Ironically, though, every time we take the book to a convention, then it's like, ooh, this art's great. This is really cinematic. Oh, I really like how this book looks. And then that gives you a little bit of like it kind of like boost your sales a little bit, going, okay, what we were seeing, we weren't imagining it. Right? It's not like you're a 5'3" guy going into the NBA going, I'm dunking on all you 7-footers. It was like, okay, we're not totally far off in terms of what we were trying to achieve and then where it would fit into the marketplace. And what makes a book work, there are a whole bunch of stuff that goes into it, especially an indie book. So it's one of those things too that also getting the responses that we did from the companies, it kind of fueled us a little bit. Where it's like, okay, well then let's do this to the best of our abilities, get these 5 issues out, and then we will have this completed story, even though like that world still is available for expansion, but we'll have this completed story where then we can actually be judged on full merits. And not everyone's going to like it, and some people are going to love it. That's just the nature of the beast, right? Like, I'm not a Martian Manhunter fan where I would buy a book, but I like him in Justice League, right? And that's the case with a whole bunch of stuff we were mentioning before. Like some stuff isn't for everybody, and so it was one of those things where we just wanted to make sure that everything that we did for issue 2, issue 3, issue 4 is at a certain level, and even communicating that stuff back to Lucas has been great, because I think that then put a little bit of a fire into him as well too. Like nice. I'll show you. And the stuff that he's producing for issues 4 and 5 are unbelievable. Awesome. Like we got the last page of issue 4 and the storytelling in it, and it's like, I wrote it with Peter. I know what's happening. I discussed it with Lucas in terms of what's going to be on that page, and then when you actually see it visually, you're like, whoa, okay. And then I knew that we were kind of cooking when I would be going through the letters, right? And just like, okay, so I'm getting the first pass of the letters and where they're going on the page, and I'm going through the script and I'm looking at the visuals, and I'm like, okay, I'm feeling it. So that's when I knew, okay, we're on to something. And we got a really interesting compliment. I can't remember the individual's name, but we went to Fan Expo here in Toronto last summer. Nice. And I was speaking to the creator of Spider Noir.
Fabrice?
Yes.
Yeah, I've had him on the show before, yeah.
Cool, totally cool guy.
Yeah, very cool.
And I had given him the previous day, or given his assistant kind of like an ash can, which is like maybe a 6-page preview of what issue 1 had. And I, went to him the next day and I'm like, so did you take a look at the handout? And he goes, yep. And I'm like, so what'd you think? And he goes, I thought that these guys respect themselves. And I was like, kind of like a bit of a head turn, because I wasn't quite sure what he meant by that. And he goes, yeah, he goes, you guys are putting out a really good product. And, you can tell that you took the time to make sure that it was of a certain level before you put it out into the world.
Yeah.
And that's one of the highest compliments that we've received in this journey, because when your peers kind of look at it and go, hey, I think you got something here, right?
Yeah. There seems
it's a little rewarding.
There seems to be a divide to me. I mean, we're all kind of outsiders looking in, but like when you look at like when someone like some of these studios get sent to this level, and you're right, it's just people at whatever position they're at. But I feel like at some point you get to a level and you kind of forget or miss the journey, or there's like a bigger divide between you and the common person, sometimes in that way. And like a guy like Fabrice is great because like he's doing his own comics too, right? Like he has his own imprint and is doing his own thing. So he hasn't got to a level where, and not that I think he's the kind of guy that would get there, but like when people get to those levels and they just ascend and they forget what it's like to be younger people coming through or doing stuff, or even like, it's kind of the same as like when you're like an academic or something and like everything needs to be Dostoevsky. You can't like just go back and enjoy, whatever a simpler book is and see it for its own merits. You kind of everything's done in this weird way that like you can't see a room for everything.
Yeah.
Once again, just only focusing on the thing that's in your sphere and not giving respect to what other people's interests are, or even acknowledging like, oh, this art might not be for me, but I can see why someone else would enjoy this.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it might be even worse now because we're so able to curate everything personally, individually, right? So I can go to a restaurant and I can order everything that I want, and there's nothing on my plate that I don't like. I can, like, my music is completely curated.
Yep.
I don't have to suffer through 3 bad songs and go to a B-side, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like everything's greatest hits, right? Or at least greatest hits to you.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes people kind of only end up seeing things a certain way. And it's kind of like a golf swing or some way that someone skates. If you go back to hockey and you say that person's stride or the way that they attack a golf ball, it's wrong. Like the mechanics are wrong, but their schooling might be different or their body's different. And in the end, it's like, are they effective?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, I love all types of artists.
Yeah.
And there were some that I loved when I was a kid. And now that I've gotten older, I appreciate others. So like, I wasn't a big Gene Colan fan.
No.
I was younger. Right. But now that I'm older, I'm like, oh, look at the way that he uses blacks. And his figure work was actually really good. Right. But I was like more into like Sal Buscema, John Byrne, George Perez, which has a different kind of energy. Neil Adams, a different kind of energy.
Yeah.
And Gene Colan, like that, you could see why he drew Dracula.
Yeah. I have some collections of his old Superman stuff, which is really nice.
Yeah.
It's interesting how that is. Like, it's almost like everyone needs to come up the same way. Like the end result being that you make a good product, whatever it is. But just because someone's not following the exact recipe you did to get there doesn't mean that they're not valid. I remember reading somewhere or hearing something about, is it Jethro Tull? Like he self-taught himself how to play the flute or something. So he doesn't play it in a way that normal flutists play it, and they really like make fun of him or something because of it. But it's like, look at the albums he's making, and obviously successful. So what the fuck's the difference? The blind guy playing the guitar in his lap, like whatever. It's not the standard way, but they're making amazing things. So who cares how they get there?
Yeah. Does it pass the ear and eye test? Right. Yeah. Or the taste test or whatever the test is.
Yeah.
And, it's kind of like butter tarts. Some people are like raisins and butter tarts. That is blasphemy. And
Pineapple
I'm,
on pizza.
oh,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. I'm
Yeah.
like going, does it taste good?
Yeah.
Does that ingredient taste good? Like, forget aesthetics. Does it work? And if it works, that's fine.
But I think it's this gross human thing that we like I had to struggle or work so hard to get here, and you should have to do the exact same thing. It's kind of like when the states got rid of their, they did all this forgiveness of student loans, and people are all
Yeah.
upset. It's like, well, I had to pay for my student loans. Why should this guy not? And it's like, what if they made a cure for cancer tomorrow? And then you're like, well, I had to go through chemo, so you should too. You shouldn't be cured of your cancer. It's such a shitty. Instead of being happy that people don't have to struggle like you did, you resent them for not having to struggle like what you did.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. And then in a weird way, because you see it a lot,
mm,
you don't do that with your kids,
mm,
right? Like people who have kids, a lot of times don't make them struggle the way that they did.
mhm.
And then they
Resent them for it.
yeah, present them for it, and then
Yeah.
you realize that why is this kid playing video games every day?
Yeah.
Because you bought him the best system ever, so he doesn't have to go get a job to go
Yeah.
buy a system like
Yeah.
we did.
Or even like go work in the mine because your family's so poor that you can't have a childhood.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
yeah, I joked about that because when I was a kid, my dad seemed to always have a little bit of that. Like you should be out in the woods, you should be doing this. Or when I was your age, had a full-time job, and I'm like, yeah, well, your dad died when you were 15. Like your family was poor, you had to go get a job to support your family. It's
Yeah,
like, shouldn't you be happy that you're not dead and that you're supporting me and letting me be a kid? Like, shouldn't But there's a bit of resentment there. It's just a human thing, but it's weird.
totally.
Yeah.
Totally. I'll never forget because I'm a former teacher, and I had this one parent complaining about his kid. His kid was a great kid,
Mhm.
right? But the expectations, going back to that again, and the comparison was like his life's easy. And I remember the parent telling me, he goes, this kid has it easy. Like when I was his age, I swam to school. I was like, what? And I was like, obviously he was probably exaggerating a little bit. He probably had to cross a river or something, or cross a
Mhm.
creek or something. And I'm like, okay, once you have that there, then that's the market. That's
Yeah.
the litmus test. And you even see it when you look at like what people make in entertainment
Mhm.
or sports compared to like the people who played 30 years ago. Everyone's
Mhm.
complaining the salaries are too high. Da 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 da. Guess what? It's the market, right? And I would love to have a doctor make $120 million. Like I would love to, but the system that we have set up, we're not having a whole bunch of people buying that doctor's T-shirt or having a television contract to watch him do operations or her do operations. So you got to change the system, right? And
Maybe you
so
solved it. Maybe doctors need merch. Maybe that's what we got to do now.
it would be great.
Yeah. You might have just figured it out.
There's a Key and Peele skit where they're talking about teachers being like superstars, like rock stars.
Right. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
is absolutely hilarious.
I,
Where basically, like, there's a regular teacher and she's driving a Mercedes because she's the
yeah.
spokesperson.
Yeah. I remember that one. I just read somewhere they're making like a full movie out of the substitute teacher that always
Oh,
messed up everybody's names.
please.
Yeah.
We to this day, and I'm guilty of it and have been guilty of it. I'm retired now, but you would get a name on the list and you're just like, oh, I'm gonna absolutely push. Can you please tell me your name? And yeah, yeah, it's hilarious because
Yeah.
like I had a kid roll their eyes at me because I said the name and it was like, no, it's pronounced this way, and she just went, oh. And I was like, I'm sorry, but
It's
I
like you
had
have to
no.
have some expectation your name is not conventional, and maybe someone's not going to know to say it right off the get go.
Yeah,
Like,
the
come on.
vowels to me made no sense, right?
Yeah.
Phonetically. So I just took a stab at it, and from then on, I learned I'll ask. If I'm not sure, I'll ask.
Wasn't like Jay Quellen or something. I
Yeah,
always say, me and my friend joke about that one a lot. Is that I always say, "You want to go to war, Balaki?"
Jay Quellen and A. Aaron.
Hey, Aaron, yeah, I like Balaki. You want to go to war, Balaki? I'll send you to Princess or Principal O. Shaw Hennessy's office.
Yeah. Oh, we used to laugh about that in the staff room quite a bit. We
Uh,
still some of my colleagues that are still in the biz.
that's awesome. So what's on the go now? Like, what do you got? What are you cooking?
So right now I'm in the middle of a Kickstarter. Actually, in the middle, it's more like the end. We got
Hmm.
about a week left, so probably by the time this airs, it'll probably be over.
Hmm.
But the Atrium 1 to 5 Kickstarter is our third Kickstarter for this miniseries, and it encompasses issues 1 and 5. But you can also get issues 1, 2, and 3, and it's basically wrapping up the story of two paramedics, Naomi and Darnell, that are tasked with delivering a donor heart to a special patient. But en route, they and their security detail are intercepted by a group of deadly assassins who happen to be vampires.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Good. That's very cool. I love a good horror narrative kind of tucked into conventional story.
Yeah, it was interesting because someone asked me like, "What's your favorite genre?" And I had to answer all of them because it just depends. If the story's great, then that's all that matters. And part of the inspiration for this was we were fans of From Dusk Till Dawn.
I thought of I made that comparison in my head, and I was like, I don't know the story well enough to go further with that line of questioning, but that's kind of what I was thinking as well. It's a
Yeah,
great movie.
yeah, it's a great movie, and it's one of those ones where like it has a certain tone, and then it turns, and then when it turns, you're like, whoa! But you're just entertained from start to finish, right?
Yeah.
And so we decided, why don't we kind of go that route with this story, but then have it where, not to be too much of a spoiler, but the world that you're in is not exactly the world that you think it is. Like it looks like what we would expect in our everyday goings on, especially for a movie or a comic or a story that involves paramedics and people that have machine guns and all that kind of stuff. But then when you add that horror element into it, that's where you get the unexpected and those twists and turns that we hope we've kind of sprinkled throughout the story quite a bit.
Yeah, those genre mashups are always a blast to work on too.
Yeah.
It's you look at any of those sort of old timey horror. I've been reading a lot of it lately just for Halloween. I'm trying to. So actually, speaking of Jordan Peele, he has a anthology book out of
Right.
from horror stories from Black creators called Out There Screaming, which it's pretty like it's summer. I wouldn't. There's no misses. I wouldn't say there's a lot of massive hits, but it's pretty great all the way through. And some of the bigger ones everybody talks about, I haven't got to yet. So,
Right.
but it's a fun little read, and you get those weird mismatches or the idea of the reality you're in. They do a really good that I just read was one of the really good stories was about the simulation theory that we're all living in a simulation,
Right.
and what happens if that starts breaking down,
Right.
or just reality starts getting weird, and that's the only real explanation that someone has for it is like like people's faces are gone because like the lights are going out, like all the things that the
Yes.
processes are running that
The
are
code is
shutting
wrong
down.
or something.
Yeah, exactly. Or the thing itself is just shutting down. And
Yes.
it's kind of it's terrifying but interesting in a new way to see it. I never thought of it that way, so the concept is really cool.
Yeah, and I think like it's a great concept, and I also think too what really works with that kind of stuff is that, and I'm not sure like if certain societies, certain cultures, whether you're in the States or Canada,
Mm,
Europe or wherever, they have a little bit more fear to them,
yeah.
where you're always afraid that what you've built is going to crumble.
Mm,
Right? I don't know if it's a Western thing, if it's like like I feel
it
just
could
personally
be.
as a Canadian,
Yeah.
I feel we are less afraid than our neighbors to the south.
Yeah. I that's a good idea. That's interesting because I think it's like in Europe at least Europeans at least have seen cultures come and go.
Yes.
North Americans really we're still riding on that first one that we built. Like we're still that
One
one
point,
hasn't crumbled yet and we haven't rebuilt. So
right? Like other than like unless you're First Nations,
yes.
you everything that you've had is kind of is
Mm,
right. But
yeah.
like so our way of life as like part of the way society's constructed now, it's on its first
Yeah.
kind of move. There hasn't been a major war here where things have been obliterated,
Yes.
right? Or cultures and languages, unless you're First Nations, where that is lost.
Yes.
But you go to other parts of the world, and oh yeah,
Yeah.
that that's definitely
Well, it's you can see through history like empires rising and falling for whatever reason, the Roman Empire, the Ottomans, whatever,
Mhm.
Genghis Khan, but like, and you think about that history, and literally you're right, it's all built up and then crumbled and then built up again, and then, but America, I think, is heading toward, who knows, but when you look at how long the democracies have lasted, they're about at the line, so we'll see.
well, I think they're in their Caligula years.
Yeah,
So
I agree. I think it's right now. That's true. I mean, I like that. It's like America, the Caligula years. It's just Trump wearing the golden little earrings or the golden little
sure.
plant things, and yeah, that
Yeah.
might be where we're at.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think it's also reflected in a lot of the entertainment
Hmm.
that we're getting, right? Like, why is horror so huge right now?
Yeah, yeah.
People are afraid.
And a lot of the subjects they're exploring aren't like it used to be. A horror movie was just here's some monsters.
Supernatural.
Yeah, now it's just here's some monsters that are an obvious allegory to some societal thing that's a real big problem. And you're like, "Oh man, like there's I mean, there's a lot of really good ones that just came out. There's a really cool one called The Substance I really like.
That's on my list.
It's very
That's
good. It's very very good. But like Cronenberg's daughter just made a movie called Humane, which I
oh
wouldn't
yeah,
have you
yeah.
seen it?
No, but I know of it.
It's very good. I wouldn't call it a horror movie per se. I mean, there's elements, but just
Mhm.
like it's getting into like what the future looks like, and like this idea that if with the concept of that movie, it kind of goes into the idea that the world is so messed up in the near future that the United Nations, or at least all the world's or all the countries make a agreement that that they have to meet a quota of population decrease by a certain year. So they offer money to families if you opt for suicide. To maybe you're worth $300,000 or something will go to your family if you opt for this. Um,
It's a neat concept.
yeah, but then there's kind of this recurring sort of thing, like the families, an elderly patriarch of a family and his wife decide to go through with it, but then the wife runs away. She chickens out, and then the government guy that runs it is a bit of a dubious guy, but he says we're supposed to take two bodies. We can't leave until we get two bodies. So the kids that are there all have to argue over who should go.
Breach of contract.
Yeah, yeah. Who should go, right? But there's an interesting idea that if society came down to a decision like that, where people have to make a sacrifice for the greater good, the people that will make the sacrifice are the good people that understand that and say, I need to do this to make it better for others. Well, the selfish assholes are the ones that are kind of going to benefit and stay behind. And what world would that look like? And that's all we got left is all the good people are gone because we made room for what we hope to be a brighter future, but then you're just stuck with selfish people.
You get the purge every day.
Kind of. It's cool. But yeah, that's what I mean. You're right about that, because horror is really taken almost every horror movie you watch nowadays is some side of a societal commentary. And that's
Yeah.
what makes them more disturbing.
Well, it's kind of, I totally agree with you. And it's kind of like going back to The Walking Dead.
Mm.
The monsters weren't the zombies,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
was the people.
yeah, exactly.
It was the uninfected that were the big monsters,
Yeah,
and it was just the window dressing were the zombies. And,
yeah.
man's inhumanity to man on full display. Um,
And
you know,
even the old, like the Night of the Living Dead was even mostly
hmm,
that. Like it wasn't the zombies were there. They're almost like a force of nature. They're not
yeah,
necessarily. Yeah, it's all of us trying to get. It's like could be any disaster zombies. It could be any disaster movie that's not a horror movie where they're running from climate change or whatever. It's like usually there's some guy that's the asshole that's the enemy, not
yeah,
the nature itself. It's just sort of the event we have to deal with. So that's
yeah.
cool.
Locks the door early or whatever.
Yeah, or needs to be in control, so
Yeah,
leaves the door open or kills the wrong person, or yeah.
yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah,
Awesome.
it's interesting. Like and I guess that's the beauty of being in geek culture,
Mm,
is that unknowingly, I think we've had our finger on the pulse
mm.
from jump. And what I mean by that is, like, you go back to like Star Trek, it's a commentary on humanity.
Mhm.
Foundation is fantastic, and I think those are built off of the Asimov
Yep.
novels, which basically every kind of like Star Trek, Star Wars is derivative of.
Mhm.
That's a comment on humanity. And so like Soylent Green, like you think of all these movies from back in the day, there's a message there
Hmm.
that is on top of
Yeah.
whatever you're watching. Like
Yeah.
responsibility. If you're a Spider-Man fan, you know all about responsibility and doing the right thing.
Hmm.
And it's kind of interesting that what was labeled as kind of like Greek, as a geek culture is really Greek tragedy and morality plays with people wearing capes and shooting laser beams out of their eyes.
Yeah. 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 Like Identity,
Yeah.
yeah, like the Swamp Thing and all that stuff they were doing
Oh,
back in the day.
totally.
Like it was just there's so much there that and a lot of creative types kind of always felt a bit like outsiders too, right? And a lot of that bleeds through in a lot of that work. And
Definitely.
I mean, Watchmen is so dense and full of paranoia and Cold War, and the other us versus them, and how far you go to unify people. It's like, yeah, like all that stuff's very pertinent, even still is today. So it's like any good, like why does a cult book still a cult book? Like why does it not fall out of favor? Right? There's something about it that can appeal to every generation. So it
Exactly.
stays.
It transcends time and place, and it speaks to the many,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
For sure.
Well, thanks so much for being on the show, Steve. This is awesome. It's a
Oh,
blast.
this is awesome. I had a great time.
All
I
right.
love chopping it up with you. This was fantastic.
Cool. Well, I'll definitely push some stuff on my social media for the book and hopefully help as much as I can with the Kickstarter. So
No, it was great. That'd
that's
be
awesome.
awesome. Thank you.
Cool. Much appreciated. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too. Take care.
There it is, my conversation with Steve Bynoe. Really cool chat. Great work. Check out the work. Check out the Kickstarter. I'll have the link on the old socials. And yeah, go check out all of his work. He's out there doing some really cool stuff. And what we got to do is support our local talent. I mean, I'm hoping this show reaches international markets, so it doesn't really matter if it's just a Canadian guy. But it's Canadians tend to try to support other Canadians, try to get out there and support those projects. So as a fellow creative in the Canadian market, I am very happy. Guys like Steve are out there waving the flag and doing some really cool work. So get out there and support it. And tune in next week to another fun-filled episode of the Graphic Histories Podcast. The Graphic Histories Podcast is a proud partner of the United Federation of Podcasts.